Hello and welcome back to this explanation of the backstage production of how the game was made, the StarDome game. And here I will explain you all the codes that I have used to make what aspects of the game. I would like to start with the very basic aspect of the game where the player gets to follow the camera. Actually, it's the opposite way. The camera follows the player's movement, and thus you can see from a 3D shoulder perspective. That's why I created a transform shoulder and I gave a pivot point from the shoulder perspective. And what happens, basically, what happens is you have a current X current X float and a current Y float, and the same goes for rotation X, rotation Y. And I just say that the mouse X and mouse Y uh, inputs should be assigned to their respective ones. And for example, for the mouse X, which goes on current X, it should be multiplied by the rotation speed, which is 5, and the sensitivity X is 15F. So the idea is that when you're moving your mouse X, the rotation speed of the mouse X should be just 5, so that it just moves really smoothly. And sensitivity wise, I want it to be at a higher sensitivity, because if I made it at a lower sensitivity, then the mouse movement will be quite jittery, and I wouldn't want the player to have uh, motion sickness because of that. Now, since this game is based on painting across a whole wide dome, I don't want the player to have a 360 degree view across each angle, because if that's the case, then the player will have problems where they would view the camera from underneath the floor if not taken care of properly. That's why I went for the idea to have a matte F clamp, which basically clamps the mouse Y sensitivity, and the just gets a minimum minus 90 degree, which is basically this area, minus 90 as in minus 90 of y, and 90 degree, which is this way. So the player will be only be able to go up till here. And the same is for the mouse X position, because rotation Y is given mouse X. Um, the reason why I interchange them is because when I was mentioning rotation Y to be mouse Y, then the opposite was happening. So I gave it a plus equals, meaning the rotation Y adds continues to increase the mouse X sensitivity, but only at 15F and after the rate, and then after once it achieves the 15 uh, 0.15 float, it stops right there. So the idea is that the player can only look up and down till 90 degrees and till 60 degrees, left and right. Now I used Euler angles to specify the rotation of X and Y coordinates based on the camera pivot, and I stated that the rotation point of the shoulders should be the camera pivot, which is basically the camera being put on the camera pivot, and the shoulder of the player model being put on the shoulder object in inspector. Now let's move on to the game screen, where simply put added I basically set the oh, sorry, the game screen, where I basically loaded the play scene, which is the game scene itself, where you can draw and are given a timer, and If we go to the menu scene, I simply use the same code as before, but now to load the menu itself. Now here, this is a really interesting bit. I learned about something called scriptable objects. And the way scriptable objects work is, for example, let's go to here, yes. I created an asset menu. Basically, I said that create a scriptable object folder and make an asset called a scriptable string. And give within the and put when you make this asset, make a public string and call value. And what it did was it gave a public accessible string called value in which I could assign to a certain object. And when I tried using this whole thing in the drop down value script, which I will explain later, all the value from the scene 1, for example, got carried to the scene 4, meaning there was this player prefs kind of concept happening. And I really like this concept because it helps me to save data. Now I created two of them because the game's idea is to guess the word and attribute based on whatever the other player draws. Since this is a two-player game, I decided to have only two values to be checked. Now this is the tricky bit. Word checker script is, as it says, it checks the word and the attribute. And I clearly kept them different while making sure that all the public texts, all the buttons are integer, are at the same place but differentiable, can be differentiated, I mean. Now let's go to the start. I gather all the text button component and I also add a guess word function as a listener when you click on the word check button. What's interesting is that when I look at the score text game objects text component, I give it a toString function of the initial, like basically I made an integer and I said 0, and I stated that this should be the text of it should be given 0 value, but to each string. Now here I went to the function and I said that if the word text box text equals uh, value, which is the scriptable string 1, like I said, I made a scriptable string object. Now if this the actual public string value of the scriptable object value is equal to the word text box, the text of the text box, the color of the word text box should be green and the color of the attribute text box should be red. And okay, so for example, you choose the word hat, and as an attribute you choose the word attribute rat. Now when it comes for me to guess your word, if I type the cat and rat in the exact syntax, then the color green will appear for both word and attribute. But let's say I type the word cat as capital C small a t, and then rat in all caps or all small letters. This will appear, meaning it's case sensitive. And then of course I made a debug log, just that's just for me as a programmer to know if this is working or not. And if the same concept was applied here, and the main thing is here, if both of these conditions are correct, like what I mentioned to you earlier, if both of these conditions are correct, you will have a green color, and then the total score will be the total score, which is 10, will be displayed to the string of the score text box, which is basically a text box I made and I provided it a particular text. So the total scores uh, to string itself, meaning let's say the total score was 10. So the total score string value, which is 1, and 0, which is 10, should be assigned to the text attribute of the score text box game object. The main idea is to have a guessing system going on using scriptable objects. Let's move on to the player screen. I already stated as earlier, sorry about that. I already stated as earlier that I have different scenes in the game that I have utilized to make the game. This is a group project, by the way, but most of the coding was done by me and another person, but this all what I explained was done by me. So here I initiate the word selection scene, which is mainly used for selecting the words and attribute before drawing the words and attribute by the same player. The exit scene is simple. You click on the exit button and quit listener is called, which basically quits the application itself. Now here I use the set alpha function of for buttons, and I basically said that if word A, which is a drop-down list, is active enabled, you should fade in you should have a fade in method called upon. And this is basically, say if you click here, then the word around here will be faded in using this code, which is basically using the values 1 and 4 to be true. Now I stated that uh, in order to have the a drop-down list and to acknowledge the options and the list values of all the drop-down list, there should be a change happening so that so that the computer and the software recognizes that okay, there is a change happening. There is a selection happening which has been changed, initial word to the new word. Therefore, I created a drop-down list and I got the scriptable string 1 value. Now I said that get the drop-down value component of the list, and when a value change is happening, you should have a new unity action, and the index of that action, which is an integer, should go something like this. The string value of the scriptable string object, which is basically the string value is within that code, should be the text of the list of the value that you get from the list from the options themselves. Meaning, let's say there are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4 are in a way texts. So there say that it starts with the number 1 only. When I choose the number 3, this 3, which is a text, should be given to the scriptable string object as a value. And at start, I just stated that the list's value is player should be derived from the scriptable object's value. And this is a special code that I learned where you can use player prefs to set or get the integer value and dump it into either a different list or a different object or to the scriptable object itself. Now that's what the drop-down list does. Basically, you have a list of words. When you choose them, they get recorded into two scriptable string objects, value and value1. So when you go to guessing, there is a guessing system happening where if the text that I typed is equal to the text of value 1, then you get a green light. And say if the only value, the first one, the text is not that I typed is not equal to the value itself, then you would have a red light or a red colored letter. Now let's move on to the on collision. Now this is so the main idea is for the player to throw dust particles, which are in the shape of spheres, onto the dome, which is basically a cuboid shaped dome on inside which the player is kept. And I just used an on collision enter and stay, where when this function on collision stay happens, and if the collider's tag is strictly equals to wall, meaning let's say the ball collides to something with the tag wall, then the rigid body of that ball or the dust particle, the constraints of the rigid body should be freezed, meaning the position will be frozen. So what happens is this code makes an illusion in front of the player that hey, that ball is sticking to the wall, and that's the main uh, logic behind making sure that the dust particles, which are used as a paint tool to draw the word and attribute, are being stuck on the wall. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoy this explanation. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. Thank you.